FMPwn's new cache, with its jungle theme and foliage-heavy environments, runs more slowly than the old version of the map does. A lot of you have complained about this, so I jumped to a humble AMD 2200G PC to test just how slowly this map runs. Costing just £80 new for a combined CPU and GPU, there's not much excuse for a gamer in 2019 to have something slower than this. It's a modest 4-core, 1st gen plus a bit Ryzen processor, with onboard Vega 8 graphics. To put that into perspective, that's like a mid to high range processor from 2012 paired with a cutting edge graphics card from 2008. Most modern PCs will be 2, 3 or even 4 times more powerful than this. At 720p low settings, the 2200G managed well over 200 FPS in all locations of Dust 2, Nuke and the old cache. On the new cache, it managed 194 FPS, which is about 22% slower than on the old map. So what does this mean? It means that you could still easily run the new cache at 720p on the slowest new gaming PC that you can buy today, at well over 144 FPS at all times. Of course, that might be difficult to do because, being on board, the monitor cable compatibility may be limited. Mine only has VGA and HDMI connectors, for example. But if you do manage to find a compatible connection, it's got the power to do it. Out of curiosity, I also tested an earlier version of the new cache, just to see how much FMPwn had managed to improve the frame rate since just before the map's official release. In most places, the frame rate was 1 to 2 FPS faster, but he has managed noticeable improvements to the B and the mid parts of the map. I still found Bombsite A to be the slowest, but I was still getting 170 FPS average. The slowest spot on the map that I found is if you stand at the back of A, looking down towards middle, so if you have an underpowered PC, try to avoid this sightline as much as you can. Let's face it, 720p at low settings is the absolute bare minimum that you'd want to run CSGO at. So I moved to 1080p, highest settings and with FXAA. The 2200G struggled with this. It ran the old cache at 89 FPS average, Nuke at 78 FPS, the new Dust 2 is actually more demanding at just 70 FPS, and the new cache failed to reach 60 FPS, scoring just 58 FPS on average. Surprisingly, the slowest location of the map was now CT spawn. I got just 48 FPS from this angle. At these settings, the 2200G is very much GPU limited. FMPwn told me that the new cache is a lot more GPU intensive. This shouldn't come as a surprise to you. CSGO is a CPU limited game, so most gaming PCs will have plenty of graphical power spare. So if you're going to make a map look better, then it makes sense to have it consume the GPU power. Really, from this we can conclude that if you're on something similar to a 2200G, like say an old i5 and Geforce 1030 or something like that, then you're best off sticking to a low resolution. So what's needed for 1080p 144Hz gaming on the new cache? For this, I simply slotted my old Geforce 670 into the 2200G system. This brings the PC up to being like a high-end system from 2012. At high settings at 1080p, it scored 259 FPS average on the old cache, 227 on Nuke, 198 on Dust 2, and 162 FPS on the new cache, managing above 144 FPS almost all of the time, unless you're at the back of A looking down towards middle, or lurking about CT spawn. I'd say that this is perfectly playable on a 144Hz monitor. Bear in mind that your frame rates will drop a bit more when playing when there are other people on the server, and especially if gaming offline against bots. But I still think a Geforce 670 is good enough if you're sticking to 1080p gaming. It's hard to say what the modern equivalent of this graphics card is. The 670 is sort of like the Geforce 760, which is kind of like the 950, which in turn is probably a bit slower than the Geforce 1050 or Radeon 560 graphics cards. It wouldn't cost a lot to get a graphics card with this level of performance these days. I then upped it to 1440p, highest settings, and 2 times MSAA, and it still performed surprisingly well. The old cache ran at an average of 178 FPS, Nuke 157, Dust 2 140, and the new cache at 112 FPS, and remaining above 100 FPS at all times apart from in CT spawn and at A looking down towards middle. It certainly ran smoothly, but I don't think it ran quite fast enough to game competitively at 1440p 144Hz. For that, you're probably looking at a Geforce 1060, Radeon 570, or, in an attempt to future-proof this video, the RX 5500. At a push, you could probably get away with a Geforce 1050 Ti. It seems the fastest spots in the new cache are around mid, T-spawn, or between there and the bomb sites, while the slowest spots are in CT spawn and, unfortunately, on the bomb sites themselves. To put the frame rate into perspective, the drop in FPS between old cache and Dust 2 is the same as from Dust 2 to the new cache. When running at 720p, which is more likely to be CPU limited, I found it was 22% slower than the old cache, like for like. While when at higher resolutions, where the GPU was more likely to be the limiting factor, the new cache was about 37% slower, which is a pretty large drop. Had I had the time, and a case large enough to fit it, I would have tested the 2080 Ti in the PC to truly make it CPU limited, but alas that will have to wait. So, the new cache. It's definitely slower than the old one. But the question is, does it matter? And should it matter? If you have a reasonably modern mid-range PC or above, then you'll be fine. You'll be able to enjoy the new cache and its pretty graphics, while still being able to play competitively on it. I don't think anybody plays CSGO competitively beyond 1440p, but out of interest I was still able to manage 60 FPS at 8K, but that was using a Geforce 2080 Ti. I can understand your frustration if you have a PC that was only just running the older map smoothly, because you will be hit hard by the new cache and will probably need to upgrade to run it well. It can seem unfair that a game you used to have no trouble with is suddenly slowing your PC down, but at the same time, CSGO is not your typical game. You've got to remember that it's 7 years old now. That's a long time in video games, and especially in hardware. From my testing, I've shown that it's possible to run it well on a decent PC that was available when the game was first launched. Since 2012, almost every official map in it has received a graphical overhaul. I remember people complaining about the new Nuke having slow performance, while now even Dust 2 is slower. Cache just happens to be the latest of many official maps to receive a graphical overhaul. I personally think the new cache is a good thing. I think it looks gorgeous, and accept the lower FPS as being a price we have to pay for this progress. Hopefully FMPone will be able to squeeze more performance out of it in future updates, but if you're struggling now, it might be time to consider upgrading, or at least dropping a resolution a bit.